Alright, I am back with another video, and I was given a task to make an interesting build that uses spiritual weapon to the best of its ability. Now, the interesting idea of using spiritual weapon as your primary method of attack was an interesting challenge to tackle, as while spiritual weapon is a pretty cool ability in and of its own right, it does come with some inherent weaknesses, which I'll get into, but also some unique strengths that come from using spiritual weapon that definitely make it viable over maybe some other methods. You see, the thing about spiritual weapon is it's not really that hard to build for. You basically just pick a cleric and level that up to full, which is what I've done here. Today we're playing a level 12 war cleric, hence the reason I haven't really decided to do a level by level breakdown for this video like I normally would, as to be honest the leveling process is extremely simple. You literally just want to pick cleric, pick any domain you like. I've personally gone for war domain today, but honestly most of them will work. I would say life and light would be my two other picks, depending on if you want to lean to a more support-based playstyle or not, but war still does the job just fine, and is the most thematically accurate, at least in my opinion, because you actually get spiritual weapon as part of your spell list for characters walked off. I love it when this happens. Come back, please. There you go. We'll do it like this. But basically, the main way we want to make spiritual weapon work is because it works off of our spellcasting modifier for the attack and damage rolls. You basically just want to make sure you have your wisdom as high as it can go. In our case, 20. And by going to level 12, while there is room for maybe like a 1 or 2 level dip into another class, I do kind of want level 6 spell slots on this build, so really it would only be a 1 level dip. And I feel like just having the room to grab an extra feat somewhere in this build by going to level 12 is much nicer. But this build isn't really about the leveling scheme. Like I say, level 12 cleric, pretty damn simple. The main choices here are things like feats, and spell choice, and the overall equipment, which is going to lean into a pretty weird, slightly gimmicky strategy, but something that can definitely pay off. Now, the goal of this build, like I said, is to use spiritual weapon. So this build can basically function as an attacking support character in a way, whereas you can basically send off your spiritual weapon to do most of your damage for you, while you can focus on buffing and supporting the team or debuffing enemies, or as such, jumping into the fray yourself, with us being a war cleric, to basically do a lot more damage than you would normally otherwise be able to, which I think is a pretty cool concept. If you play it right, this kind of summoned swordsman character can actually do really well in a lot of different facets of play. At the end of the day, it is a pretty simple basic cleric, but when you take into account the strategy, it can work pretty well. Let's talk about how to use spiritual weapon as effectively as possible. Now, first off, let's talk about one of the biggest strengths of spiritual weapon. You can attack while under the effect of Sanctuary. Sanctuary is a pretty damn awesome spell. It prevents enemies from being able to attack you directly. And since spiritual weapon counts as a summon, you can still attack using spiritual weapon without breaking Sanctuary. This gives you the ability to freely heal things, debuff things, maintain a concentration spell with pretty much like the most ease you could ever imagine. You're almost never going to drop this because you're never really going to get attacked, or you can decide to forego Sanctuary and just use other attacks as part of your action, because again, another big strength of spiritual weapon is the fact that it's used as a bonus action to cast, which means that you can just continuously use your action for whatever, and you don't need to maintain it every turn with a bonus action or whatever. But spiritual weapon, okay, this is really weird, so it doesn't cost your bonus action to attack with spiritual weapon on subsequent turns. However, the spiritual weapon itself has an action and a bonus action, and it attacks using its bonus action. This prevents us from being able to use a really gimmicky strategy of being able to buff it with haste to technically give it extra attack, which would have been very cool, but alas is not really going to work. It would still boost the spiritual weapon's movement speed, which is actually somewhat valuable if you want to choose that as your concentration option, using something like the Gonta Mail or the Darkfire Shortbow to do so, but otherwise it's not going to have as much of an effect. And finally, the third thing that makes spiritual weapon really useful is the fact that it deals force damage. Force damage is pretty damn good in this game if you didn't already know, as it basically allows you to bypass almost all resistances in the game. So, to break it down, you've got a summon that deals the best damage type in the game that attacks independently of you using its own resources. This is pretty effective. However, there are some drawbacks. First off, again, it does use its own turn and again has its own abilities, which means it doesn't get something like extra attack, which can bring down the overall DPS per turn a little bit if you yourself are not attacking as well. But really, that's the only downside to using it, and other than the fact that even if you cast it at level 6, it has a slightly lower HP pool, which can mean it can go away rather quickly, but I've accounted for that, and we've got a lot of stuff we can use to make that not really an issue anymore. Oh, and one more thing that makes Spiritual Weapon awesome, it has resistance to all damage. So despite that lower HP, it's actually pretty tanky. You effectively have double the HP that you actually see on the screen, which means we can really make this thing a damn tanky party member. And again, if you play this build with the idea that it is a support build meant to work with your allies, it can really, really work in your favor. Because Spiritual Weapon, of course, it basically acts as another party member, like I said, that is resistant to all damage, but enemies also prefer to target yourself or your party members as opposed to the Spiritual Weapon. So if you've got Karlach as a barbarian up in front, for example, she's going to be taking most of the hits anyway, and your Spiritual Weapon is basically just going to get away with doing whatever it wants absolutely for free, while you get to hang in the back and do the same. So in reality, it just creates such an interesting, and again, slightly gimmicky playstyle that really can work in your favour if you know how to employ it properly. So, let's talk about how to do that. As I said, we've got some pretty useful spells here. Sanctuary, awesome spell. Basically makes our enemy either forces our enemy to focus on other party members, or our Spiritual Weapon itself, which again takes reduced damage. We've also got access to Bless, which can bless ourselves and any of our party members, which is another great support spell, and since Spiritual Weapon does not cost concentration, because this is based off of the 2014 rules, we can use any concentration spell here, which is great. And again, other spells to look out for. Command, Hold Person and Hold Monster are all great battlefield control spells, but are going to debilitate your enemies in multiple different ways, creating openings for you. Hold Person and Hold Monster are very, very valuable here as well. Hold Monster especially being a really good reason to go for War Domain Cleric here, because it's only available on the War Domain spell list. Being able to basically guarantee critical hits from all of your Spiritual Weapon attacks is very, very nice. So I honestly think it's probably going to be your main concentration option. Also, we have healing spells here. Now, this is where things get a bit weird. So, healing spells are great for just being a general support build. We can basically pick these up just to kind of help out our team like your average cleric would. And then you're thinking, oh yeah, we'll just heal the Spiritual Weapon because it's a summon, right? Well, no. Spiritual Weapon cannot be healed by conventional healing spells. But that doesn't mean it can't be healed, and this is where things do get a bit gimmicky and weird. So, while you cannot heal a Spiritual Weapon's HP, you can increase its maximum HP via means such as Hero's Feast and Aid. So, with Hero's Feast, you can give it a bunch of extra HP as well as some other advantages for you and your whole party. Again, everyone benefits from this, so you might as well use it, especially since we're basically going to have like 5 level 6 spell slots with this build, which means it's very easy to use Hero's Feast even here. But Aid is also really interesting, because in addition to giving the Spiritual Weapon more maximum HP, which stacks from the stuff you'd get from Hero's Feast at high levels, it also heals for the amount that you raise. So technically, you can heal the same Spiritual Weapon over and over and over again by using Aid. However, by the time this build is done, we will have ways to basically summon multiple Spiritual Weapons in a single combat encounter or over a long day, so this isn't going to be so much of an issue. Again, if your Spiritual Weapon is not really the main target of your opponent's attacks, which it really shouldn't be. Again, the AI tends to focus on party members. That might be different on Honor mode, I don't know. But for now, basically, Aid is a real roundabout way of actually being able to heal your Spiritual Weapon. So you can even choose, as a strategy in high-level gameplay, to basically just stack 2 castings of Heroes, basically a casting of Hero's Feast and a casting of Aid, to make a really tanky party member. I think the highest HP I got on one of the Spiritual Weapons was like 76, which for a Spiritual Weapon, again, resistance to all damage, that's effectively like 160 HP. That's pretty good, all things considered. So overall, very, very impressive little combo here that can actually keep Spiritual Weapon up a lot longer. The final spells I'll kind of recommend here just for flavor and such. Obviously, if we're summoning weapons, then summoning a Guardian of Faith isn't too far-fetched from that. And also Blade Barrier, because this is a spell I never really get to use, but being able to spend our concentration to make this wall of summoned weapons that creates difficult terrain and deals slashing damage honestly feels pretty cool. And again, I never get to use this, but since we're a level 12 Cleric, we might as well. So Blade Barrier is another choice here. Well, let's talk about the equipment, because the equipment is really what's going to allow this build to shine and have its own unique playstyle. Because as you can see, we've got a lot of weapons. Now, in the early game, you're pretty much just going to be primarily using Spiritual Weapon as a spell, so I don't really have a early game weapon recommendation for you. Since the Spiritual Weapon casts off of your spell casting modifier, not your spell save DC, so it's actually the modifier used by the stat. So stat boosting equipment like staffs that give you a +1 to your spell attack rolls and spell save DC actually do not affect the chance to hit of the spiritual weapon. Only the raw stats do. So there's not really like a lot of early game stuff that's going to improve spiritual weapon, but you can still use spiritual weapon in the early game because again, it's a level 3 spell, a level 2 spell, sorry, that you get at level 3, and you achieve level 3 very, very quickly in this game. So you're not going to be without your main source of damage for long. And again, it'll still be a pretty solid source of damage even in the early game. Again, that force damage is really nice, so make sure you use it appropriately. But anyways, by the time you get to the late game, you will have accumulated quite a few interesting weapons. Now, everything I'm about to show here is acquired in Act 3, but again, if you're playing a War Domain Cleric, you can pretty much use any staff, weapon, whatever you like leading up to this point, if you want to go for a more attack-focused variant, but otherwise, still just being a support spellcasting cleric is going to do you just fine for most of the game. So, let's talk about the first thing here. We do run dual wielder in this build. This is going to allow us to dual wield staffs. Now, remember how I said that spiritual weapon is cast with a bonus action? This means that your action is free quite a lot of the time. Now, let's say your spiritual weapon goes down. Well, you can swap to any weapon you have in your inventory and still summon the spiritual weapon and then still attack with it because it uses its own initiative. So, for the first time ever on this channel, weapon swapping mid-combat is actually viable and a decent strategy, which is kind of cool. And dual wielder is going to help us with that, so make sure you grab the dual wielder somewhere into the build, most likely in the late game. If it's not your level 8 feat, make it your level 12 feat. Really up to you what you want to choose here. It's just going to allow us to dual wield our staffs here, which just makes weapon swapping a bit easier, also giving us access to offhand attacks if we don't want to have to faff with using our war priest's charge, if we're war domain, etc, etc. It just helps us out a lot, gives us a +1 to AC. Overall, it's pretty nice. So, let's talk about what we're actually doing here. Our first weapon is the Harper Sacred Striker. Anyone who knows about Spiritual Weapon probably saw this one coming, as this one does give you a free cast of a level 6 Spiritual Weapon, so you don't even have to spend a spell slot on this one. As long as you have this staff equipped, the Spiritual Weapon will remain, which is really useful, because again, that saves a level 6 spell slot for Hero's Feast or Aid, or whatever else you want to do, to really make that first Spiritual Weapon you summon pretty buffed up. But then, there is also, I'll just move that to the side, the 2 spell slot weapons, I like to call them. These two staffs come with Arcane Battery, essentially allowing you to cast a spell for free, using any spell slot level. So, this is 2 more level 6 spell slots to use, and again, using our dual wielder, we can swap these out, whether they're in their main hand or the offhand. So, say our spiritual weapon from Harper Sacred Striker goes down, we just pop the Arcane Battery and cast Spiritual Weapon again, making it so that we have another level 6 spiritual weapon. In total, with all of these weapons, we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 level 6 spiritual weapons, and it technically 6 if we count the Spellcrux Amulet, which is also going to help us with that as well, giving us an extra spell slot. Now this one does cost a bonus action to restore, so it doesn't fit quite as well into our rotation here, but once per long rest is still pretty damn good. So yeah, 6 level 6 spiritual weapons in a single build, the last of which being obtained from Sethan, which, while it does reduce us to only being able to summon a spiritual great axe, it's still a level 6 spell on a +2 great axe, which is going to do pretty damn well for us if we do want to go in swinging. It also comes with an extra usage of a reduced spell, which is also kind of fun. So yeah, basically across all of this, you can use your action to swap weapons on your turn, maybe you even cast haste on yourself to be able to do this multiple times, to really just create some shenanigans, being able to summon multiple spiritual weapons, again, over the course of multiple fights, or a single fight. Maybe you're in one big fight against a boss, and you just want to be able to summon an arsenal, which, hey, that's what this build is about. So yeah, overall, using your action to swap between weapons, summoning the spiritual weapon with your bonus action, you're going to be able to keep attacking, and then as well also have the ability to support your party members, etc, etc. Now, this obviously does seem like a lot of resources in one basket. Obviously, things like the Staff of Spells Power and the Markaheshkir Staff are usually reserved for, you know, your wizards, your sorcerers, maybe even your warlocks, but here, I do think it has quite a lot of value. The Markaheshkir especially obviously giving us access to Kareska's Favor for more spellcasting, yada yada yada, you know the drill. And again, if you decide you want to commit yourself to the bit of using spiritual weapon, you might as well go all the way. But in reality, if you do want to spread these resources out across the party more, you only really need the Harper Sacred Striker and the Sephin, and you're probably going to be able to long rest frequently enough where it's not really going to matter about the spell slot management nearly as much. So honestly, go crazy. Entirely up to you. It's not even taking into the account that you could obviously summon spiritual weapon at lower spell levels, but obviously level 6 gives us the most bang for our buck. That big, because you get that extra couple of d8 of force damage, which obviously is really nice. 3d8 force damage per attack is good. But yeah, obviously, this is quite a gimmicky strategy, but the fact that it works at all is what made me want to make this video in the first place. That, and I was also requested to give this a try, and hey, I'm doing it. So yeah, that is all of the kind of main weapons that make up our spiritual weapon strategy. As I said, we do have the 2 haste bows, the Darkfire Shortbow, and Viganta Mail. Obviously, we can give ourselves an extra action here, buff up a party member, or technically buff the spiritual weapon. Again, that extra action isn't really going to be doing much, but the extra movement speed is pretty good. There's another sort of weakness of spiritual weapon, is that if it's not positioned well, the movement speed sucks, so you might want to give it a bit of a buff, but otherwise you can't really do it. Also, if I remember correctly from my testing, regular haste works on spiritual weapon, but celestial haste doesn't. Kind of weird, but that is how it works. But the Gaunter Mail will be a great ranged option. If we're hanging in the back and you want to kind of pepper your enemies with arrows, again, you can use your bonus action attack to do that as well with War Priest charges. Gaunter Mail, also pretty damn good. So overall, I recommend this whole kind of setup here, especially in the late game, and in the early game, I mean, just use spiritual weapon or whatever decent weapon you can pick up. Doesn't really matter. But anyways, moving on to the armor and equipment. First up, the Holy Lance Helm. Now you see, I had a bit of a goal with this build. If we wanted to take the heat off of our spiritual weapon and use ourselves as kind of the method of doing so rather than a party member, let's make it as punishing as possible for our enemies to attack us. And the first way to do that is with the Holy Lance Helm. If creatures attack us and they miss their attack roll, they have to make a dex save or take radiant damage. It also gives us a +1 to our constitution saving throws, which could be good if we are maintaining concentration on an important spell. So overall, if they attack us and miss, there's a chance they'll take retaliatory damage, which again, just that little bit of punishment. We're going to be combining this with the Rippling Force Mail. This allows us to gain Force Conduit whenever we take physical damage such as slashing, piercing, or bludgeoning. And Force Conduit basically makes us take reduced damage for each stack remaining, and we can stack up to 7, so that could be a -7 to our damage, making us pretty tanky. And if we take damage while we have 5 or more turns remaining, we explode with force damage. So it's almost like our soul kind of extending out into our weapons is also still a part of us internally, meaning that if we start taking attacks, we start retaliating with force damage automatically, which is pretty damn cool and fit the vibe of the build, and it kind of feels like a bit of a cleric-y armor, so I wanted to include it here. And again, another reason to play a War Domain Cleric, because you know, you gain access to heavy armor, so it works. Now, as for your other options, this is where the build gets a little bit weird. There's not really a lot of equipment, like I said, that directly affects spiritual weapon outside of the weapons that we've already chosen. So really, I did kind of lean into the more supporty cleric type stuff, which is a bit more generic, but it does get the job done. So, first of all, the Hellrider's Pride. Whenever we heal another creature, it will gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage dealt by weapon attacks. So we can use this to heal up ourselves and our party members and give ourselves resistance, which is pretty good, again allowing us to be even more tanky. Combining this with the Boots of Striding to allow us to, while we have concentration, we gain a bit of momentum, meaning we gain a bit more movement speed, but also while we are concentrating, we cannot be knocked prone or moved against our will. We just become this kind of tanky bulwark that uses summoned weapons to attack, which I think is pretty damn awesome. The aforementioned Spellcrux Amulet, again, gives us another spell slot once per long rest of our choosing, so it's another level 6 spell slot. And then finally, the classic duo of the Whispering Promise and Ring of Salving, allowing us to give Bless and a little bit of extra healing to any creature that we heal. Which, honestly, again, if we do lean into kind of the support angle while our spiritual weapon does the bulk of the work, it works out pretty damn well for us. But yeah, overall, that is the build. Again, not my typical style of video, as it is a bit more based on kind of, you know, general strategy and like equipment choices and spell choices rather than the actual leveling scheme, but it felt like a unique challenge to really take spiritual weapon to as high of a level as it can possibly go. But let's actually talk about how good the build is. Okay, so it's a bit gimmicky, and I would say it's only really going to perform well if you know how to pilot it correctly, which took me a little while to truly figure out. Especially considering I test my builds in solo, whereas this is meant to be a team supporting support build, it was a bit hard to gauge exactly how effective it was initially. But I was still able to use it to take down my usual Steel Watcher encounter, which is the kind of benchmark I use for all of my builds, and not all of my builds have been able to do that, so it's definitely not the worst thing I've ever made, and I would argue it's far from it. You see, again, we are doing typical cleric stuff, sanctuary shenanigans and all that, but combining that with the way to create consistently powerful spiritual weapons like multiple times per long rest is honestly really good. You have the ability to use, again, things like aid, which is a gimmick in itself, to be able to keep your single spiritual weapon up for long periods of time, or you can still continue to summon multiple ones. Now, if your spiritual weapon is basically being the party tank, like you're the only one really there, and you have sanctuary up, and so everyone's just attacking your spiritual weapon, it is still going to go down fairly soon, even with its resistances, maybe in a round or two. But if the damage is spread out properly across yourself, your spiritual weapon, and the party, like, you will be able to keep it up pretty consistently and have a damn good source of damage. And again, the fact that spiritual weapon lacks a concentration requirement means that you really do get to have a bit of a play about with all of your other concentration options. Things that I haven't shown here, like Beacon of Hope for healing. You've got so many options available to you that could really just make this build stand out. So honestly, play around with the concept, see what you can come up with, because there is a lot to it. And like I said, the idea of using summoned swords like spiritual weapon as your primary method of attack was honestly pretty cool. Now, if you thought when you clicked on this video that you were going to see Pact of the Blade Warlock, well, I did give that a go as well, but unfortunately just the fact that you have to use an action to swap your Pact weapons, and the fact that the Pact weapons aren't really very good, made me kind of stay away from it, which is what made me lead to Spiritual Weapon instead. And there's even some underlying things that I wasn't really expecting from this build, like the fact that, again, once our Spiritual Weapon is up, our action and bonus action are pretty free. We can do an attack with our main action using things like our Divine Strike to really make those attacks powerful, plus Guided Strike as well can be used on ourselves or our spiritual weapon as well, or any of our allies, making us a great support build. So even though we have lower strength, we can still gain pretty consistent hits with things like Sethan or our staffs in melee, because we can use Guided Strike to make that happen, as well as being able to dish out a pretty decent chunk of damage overall with just our basic attacks, again, allowing us to be a bit more of an effective frontline combatant if we so choose. But so again, we can attack if we have the Sethan out, for example, a two-handed weapon, we can attack twice per turn, up to 6 times per long rest, thanks to War Priest extra attack charges, or we can dual wield and gain that offhand damage as well, which again can also be boosted by Divine Strike. So really, you have a lot of things available to you. This build probably is the most free in action economy that I've ever done, because it just gives you so much. Your primary method of attack doesn't use your own resources, and your action and bonus action every turn are pretty free to do whatever you want. We're a full caster, and we have the full cleric spell list pretty much available to us, including amazing support spells and such like that. So really, it's just about kind of figuring out exactly how to pilot it correctly to get the most out of it. And if you've got a solid party around you, you're going to do well, but you're not going to excel. Again, gimmicky strategies like this, while fun and provide a unique kind of roleplay fantasy and challenge, definitely aren't the most straightforward, and as such become less effective over time, and in some encounters might just get completely shut down. So you really do have to be a bit careful when employing a build like this, especially if you dedicate an entire playthrough to it. But again, if you're willing to take that risk, there's definitely a reward. So feel free to explore and experiment. Maybe just respec and test out this build in Act 3 and see if you're having fun with it. Give Shart a new way to do things for the party that isn't missing Sacred Flame every 2 seconds. That old joke, yeah. It's been a while since I've made these videos, if you couldn't tell. But yeah, no, fun, interesting concept that I was happy to explore, and I hope you all enjoyed this slightly different style of video. This might crop up every so often if I want to show off specific interactions. I've done sort of videos like this before, things like the doing every damage type in a single hit type video. There was a couple of others, maybe the Wesker video from a while back. It's been a while, but yeah, let me know if you want to see anything else kind of like this, where I kind of focus on more of this kind of part of the video rather than the level by level breakdown, because we are at the point now where I've got so many bloody videos that are very detailed that I think most of you guys kind of know what to do at this point, so I don't know, let me know what you think. But yeah, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.